Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Sunday Evenings with Joe. This episode I would like to call Moses. As you can see, I'm coming to you again from the treehouse by candlelight. I would like for you to come back with me now to another world and another time. Ireland in the 1950s and 60s. My Ireland, I like to say. And it was a very strange time because back then in Ireland, things were tough enough. And we were always heading off. There was always somebody going away. You know, the American wake, we used to call it. There'd be somebody heading off. And it was like the flight of earls all over again. There was a reason for it. And that was that we had very large families. Small were the farms, and few and far between were the opportunities for youngsters. And so as soon as we got big enough and strong enough to fend for ourselves, we packed a suitcase and away with us wherever our fancy took flight. We followed it way out into the world. And of course, I was the youngest of 11 children, and so I was the last of our crowd to leave. But so I found myself, it was like a normal annual thing. There was somebody going away somewhere, America or Canada or Australia or New Zealand or somewhere. And at one period I was at home, just myself and mum, and even my father was gone, so it was just myself and mum were there. And we had a great big yard outside, and there was a great big old oak wood up behind the house with hundreds of old beautiful big old oak trees. And in the winter time, of course, they'd shed the leaves and the wind would blow them all down across the yard, and there'd be a sea of them outside around the yard. They were like more than ankle deep, you know. And I liked nothing more in those days than to be outside in my Wellingtons, mushing like that through the leaves, daydreaming away, looking down, because they had beautiful colours, everything from yellow to gold and brown and ambers and reds, and like the song long ago said, and colours that no one knew the names of. And I'd be there mushing away in a world of my own, dreaming away, This particular evening in the winter time, I was outside doing exactly that. Mushing away there through the leaves. And my head was down like this, do you see? And all of a sudden, there was another pair of boots in front of mine, looking at mine. I had managed to go straight to where there was a man standing outside in the yard. And I followed the boots and the legs up. And there was the strangest looking old man I had ever seen in my life. He had long white curly hair that came down to about here, and he had bleary eyes, a ruddy complexion, and the lids seemed to be down like this and looked to be fully irrigated. Well, he frightened the daylights out of me. He was looking straight at me. And I turned and I ran in home to Mum, and she was inside. She was baking a cake and she was there kneading the dough away. I remember this now like it was yesterday. This is honest to goodness. I'm not telling you a word of a lie. And so I said, Mum, there's a fierce, queer-looking old devil outside in the yard. Come with me. And she said, who is it? Is it such a one? Is it such a one? I said, no, it's not anyone we know. It's a complete stranger. She said, who does he look like? I said, Moses. He looks like Moses. And she got a fit of laughing. The reason I said that was we had a big family Bible, the Holy Bible. And there was brilliant paintings all through the Old Testament, done by the grand masters, the grand Italian masters, Italians mostly, through the Renaissance period, through the 13, 14, 15, 1600s. All the brilliant artists like Raphael and Botticelli and Da Vinci, and all of them brilliant artists, they had all contributed paintings depicting scenes from the Old Testament, all trying to get their paintings into the Bible so that they could be somehow immortalized, I suppose. Fair play to them. But there was a picture in there of Moses. But let me tell you about Abraham first. There was one in there of Abraham, right? And he's got this big knife, a huge big dagger. And he's got his young laddie stretched out there on a big stone table, right? And he's got this big whore of a knife. No, this knife now, it'd make Crocodile Dundee's knife long ago look like a toothpick. And he had it up like this, and he was just about to plunge it down into the young laddie when an angel comes sailing in sideways and grabbed his wrist. The angel is in the painting as well. There's three characters in the painting. and he grabbed his wrist just in time. Well, what a beautiful... Pat Jennings, the goalkeeper, wouldn't do it nicer. And saving the young fella just in time. And of course, out of the three characters, I could relate to the young laddie in most, because he'd be about my age, I suppose, young Isaac. And I could imagine myself there looking at Isaac and saying, "And what are you doing with yourself today, Isaac?" And he'd reply to me something like, as cool as you like, "Today I'm getting sacrificed by my father, please God." Well, the Bible can be a great crack, given a chance. But it's not Abram I was going to talk about. I was going to tell you about Moses. There was a painting in there of Moses, and he had the long white curly hair and the same look, exactly for all the world like the Scotch geek now outside in our yard. We went out to the door, myself and Mum, and we looked over, and there he was, still in the very same spot. And he was there, just standing there like a statue, with a sea of gold and beautiful treasure all around him. And there he was. And my mother, looking at him, said, like any decent Irish woman would, "Would you like a cup of tea?" And he just looked. He didn't say a bit, but he just looked, and he walked over to us and came in the door and sat down and sat there by the fire, looking into the fire, not saying a word. And my mother is over there making a big pot of tea and preparing some warm food for him, because she was a decent creature, my mother. She was a quill from Dernasaggart. Well, as soon as he had downed the food and sent 2 or 3 mugs of tea down his gullet, it seemed to loosen up the talking mechanism, and he started to tell us a story that blew my mind entirely. The mission that he was on. He wasn't, I'll tell you now, on the rocky road to Dublin to buy a bag of spuds. Far from it. He was off out of the Milky Way, out across the next galaxy over, Andromeda, and he was going there with the biggest mission of all, to find the girl that he loved in his youth. And she had somehow or other, he had lost her. That was unclear. She had disappeared on him in some way. And he was travelling the universe to find this girl. And he was going to find her now, because word had reached him that she had found her way back to Andromeda. And there he was going to find her and reunite with this girl. And nothing was going to stop him. And I was sitting there across, fascinated by this man now, blown away completely. His stories and his way of telling them left the priests for dead, and the school teachers and the bishops and all of them. Their stories paled into insignificance compared to this man. Oh my goodness me, I thought, you are the most interesting man in the whole wide world. And I was sitting there and I'm thinking, please keep talking. But as soon as he had said what he was going to say, and he had his belly full, he got up and he walked off out the door, left the door open, didn't say good night or goodbye. He was focused. He had such a focus on him. He was just set on what he was doing. 3 or 4 days went by, and we were at Mass, myself and Mum. And outside of the chapel, after Mass, all the women were there standing around in a circle, and I'm only a young laddie, and I was there with my mother. And the women were talking about this and that and whatever was going on. And then one of them said, "Did any of you get paid a visit by a very strange old man with long white curly hair?" "We did. I did. Did you?" "I did." "Did you feed him?" "Here, I did, of course." And this was the kind of conversation. Wasn't his conversation very queer and odd? One of them says, "Oh, indeed it was. It was very strange indeed." And then one of them says, "Did anybody catch his name?" "Moses," my mother said. "His name is Moses." And everybody laughed. Mum could be very funny. And the name stuck like glue. And we'd be on the bus going to school, and somebody would spot him up along the side of the road, up ahead, and they'd say, "Moses," and we'd all run over to the window, and we'd be, "Moses, Moses," like this out the window, and he'd look up with the bleary eyes by. Now, as suddenly and as quickly as Moses came amongst us, he disappeared. I don't know how long, maybe a month or 2, and he was gone. And nobody ever saw or heard of Moses ever again after that. And years and years and years and years went by, and I was out here in Australia, and I had managed to get myself a book of Yeats's poems, W.B. Yeats. And I was reading through the poems and I found a poem called The Song of the Wandering Aengus. And I thought to myself, you must have met Moses, because this is exactly Moses' story and his way of telling it and his eccentricity, if that's a word. And you see, you can't make people like this up. You can generate them in your head. You can meet them, you can expound on them, you can embellish it, you can do whatever you like with a story, but you can't design them in here in the first place. You have to meet them, you have to experience them. And he must have met this man, Aengus, that he wrote of, just like I met Moses. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to write the poem. I'll tell you the poem. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was in my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand, and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing, and moth-like stars were flickering out, I dropped the berry in a stream, and caught a little silver trout. And then I laid it on the floor, and I went to blow the fire aflame. But something rustled on the floor. Someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded in the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she is gone, and kiss her lips and take her hand, and walk among long dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun. William Butler Yeats wrote that. And so you can imagine, when I read it, I thought, this is Moses. He was talking about Moses, this Aengus. And I thought, it must have been him. But then, of course, it couldn't have been, because there was a discrepancy of something like 100 years between Yeats's time and my time. 80 anyway, at the very least, but possibly 100. And so, of course, it wasn't Moses. Or was it? Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thank you for spending another Sunday evening with Joe. We'll talk again next week. I have a fantastic story for you next week. But until then, whatever you do, stay loving, because there's nothing else in this world worth anything other than giving and sharing and living love. And I wish that for you, and we'll talk again next week. Good night and blessings to you all.